welcome to Thurston Community Media Studio A. I'm Deborah Vinsel, the CEO. For 30 years, TC Media has had a partnership and collaboration with the League of Women Voters from Thurston County to help educate voters. This is a prime example of our community as our middle name and how we provide community services. We operate with support from Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, and Thurston County to bring community media resources to individuals, organizations, schools, and government agencies so they can create and share digital media messages. Our programming is seen on 4 local cable channels on the Comcast cable system, but now we're also available on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and apps on iPhones and Androids. So you can find our programming pretty much anywhere. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here in the studio for this event. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce the president of the League of Women Voters of Thurston County, Darlene Hine.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm thrilled to be here in person with all of you. We're finishing up our candidate forums. This is actually the last one for the primary. We will be doing the fall ones, which will be the general. We've been doing candidate forums going on 30 years with TC Media, and we are always pleased to have this partnership and bring this information out. The League of Women Voters is really about helping people know how to vote, when to vote, where to vote, all of those kind of things, but also, more importantly, to be informed voters. Voters who know the subject matter, who know who is running for office and where they stand so that they can make a vote that fits their needs and wants and what works for their community. And we're really pleased to have the ability to do this. I am the president of the League of Women Voters, and we work very hard to ensure that the right to vote is something that is available to everyone and something we feel is extremely important. We're very pleased to have Karen Venezuela. She is our moderator tonight, and I'm going to allow her to go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this 2023 primary election candidate forum for the City of Olympia Mayor. This forum is presented by the League of Women Voters of Thurston County in collaboration with Thurston Community Media. I'm Karen Valenzuela from the League, and I'll be moderating this forum this evening. James Allen will be our timekeeper. The candidates for Mayor for City of Olympia are David Ross, Desiree Chantel Tolliver, and Dante Payne. The League stresses the importance of civility in our candidate forums, and you've each received our rules for that, our ground rules for that, and you agree to abide by them. Thank you both. Thank you all. We've asked the audience to submit questions, which I will read after we've done our introductory remarks. We've also asked the public to submit some questions, and we've gotten several from the public. The questions will be directed to all 3 candidates. No fair asking a question for only one candidate to respond to. We won't be doing that this evening. So also let me remind everybody before we get going to mute your phones. And also a request from our studio audience, please hold your applause until the very end of the forum. I'm going to ask the questions in reverse alphabetical order to start, and then I'll alternate so that each candidate has the opportunity to be the first one to respond to each question. Each candidate will have a minute to respond to the questions. Watch the timer. When it turns yellow, that means you have 15 seconds left, and when it turns red, please stop. Although, please finish the sentence that you're engaged in. If you don't notice any of these signs, I'll be giving you a high sign that your time is up. All right, so for our first question, I will begin with David Ross. David, please tell us why you believe you're the best candidate for this position.
Thank you, Karen. I think I'm the best candidate for this position because having been a lifelong resident of Olympia and noticing our city going in some directions that are troublesome and leading to division, leading to economic downturn, leading to challenges with our downtown especially. I'm someone who's willing to call for change, speak out about change, and vote for change as a member of the City Council. In my observations, we've had a lot of our governing has been done sort of uniformly, of a like mind, not a variety of opinions and a lot of variety of experiences. And I think someone who, in some cases, even has the courage and the wherewithal to stand up and say the emperor has no clothes is exactly what Olympia needs at this time.
Dante, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Karen, for that question. I believe that I am the right candidate for this position because of my experience and my record on the City Council. I also believe that the city's mayor is also a facilitator. And so it's very important to have a mayor that has working relationships with each member of the council so that the council can continue to be effective and get the work of the community finished. My experience is at each level of government. So I've worked at the federal level, I've worked at the state level, and now the local level. That's very important for the city's mayor because you need to have relationships in order to receive all types of grant opportunities and things like that for funding projects at the local level. And so that becomes very critical. And I also believe my lived experience speaks to my position now on the council and will serve me well in the role as mayor.
Thank you. Desiree.
This is a great question. I believe the reason that I am the best for this position is because I have never been in the government before, and I have a genuine desire to help people. I have a genuine desire to enrich the community, and I also have a genuine desire that everyone has a foundation that they need to pursue happiness. America is built off of the pursuit of happiness, but it's hard to tell people to do anything else other than survive when there's no foundation for them to do anything else. So really, I think I'm the best for this position because I want something different. I want Olympia to be what Olympia has always been before this, and Olympia has always been a little bit opposite of everything else and has always had a heart, and I feel like we could bring it back.
Thank you. For our second question, Dante, you'll be first. What role do you think the mayor should have regarding law enforcement policies and procedures?
Thank you for this question, Karen. So as council member, I've led quite a bit on the work of reimagining public safety, and I've chaired the city's Community Livability and Public Safety Committee. I believe that the role that law enforcement plays in the city it's very crucial that we as a council have a relationship with the police chief, who sort of drives the climate of the department. And it's very important that we have a working relationship where I trust his or her professional expertise, in this case, his expertise. And I think that that's served us pretty well. I also think that the role involves listening to our community, having community input, which is what we've done with our Reimagining Public Safety process. It's a community-led process to work with, come up with solutions to respond to some of our public safety issues. And we've done just that, and we'll continue to implement those recommendations from the public.
Thank you. Desiree.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What role do you think the mayor should have regarding law enforcement policies and procedures?
I think the mayor's role is to hear everyone's concerns who lives wherever they're presiding. I think also not only are they supposed to hear their concerns, they're supposed to research them, they're supposed to answer the public accordingly, as well as we always hear about cracks in the system, but the reality is all of those cracks are giant gapeholes that people are left to suffer in, and I think the mayor's role should be to make sure those gapeholes are not there, that they're filled with dirt and not with other citizens. So yeah, they need to be involved in every aspect, not necessarily the only voice, but they definitely do need to advocate for everyone who they're representing.
Thank you. David, would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
What role do you think the mayor should have regarding law enforcement policies and procedures?
It's the policies and procedures that comes to mind to me. That obviously a mayor is not an expert in law enforcement, but I think a mayor should be an expert at building coalitions and building collaboration. First and foremost, law enforcement in terms of the city are city employees, and setting high expectations, setting clear expectations for law enforcement is definitely under the purview of the mayor and the balance of the city council. I think one thing that a mayor should do at this time is law enforcement is facing shortages nationwide, and people are leaving the industry and they're leaving large cities. This is an opportunity for Olympia to not face that struggle and to maybe be able to position itself to not be in that position, find law enforcement, high quality law enforcement wanting to get out of maybe more dangerous or challenging environments, and Olympia with our quality of life might be able to capitalize on that and utilize that if we support and train and set clear and high expectations for our law enforcement.
Thank you. Desiree, you're up first this time. How will you help support downtown businesses and reduce vacancies?
That is a great question. I believe the way to support downtown businesses is to always keep the best interest of the community at heart. I remember being younger and going to Arts Walk and always being so excited, and I really loved Archibald Sisters because before everybody else had all the interesting stuff, they always did. And I can understand how it can be hard to go downtown now and how it can be hard to feel safe downtown. The one thing though that I do want people to remember is that houseless people and people with mental health and people with drug addiction are not your enemies. They are people who do not have a foundation. And if we want our community to be better, if we want things to improve, we need to make sure that everyone in our community has the same support system. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
I think when you take a look at downtown Olympia, we have some unique challenges. We have a unique opportunity. A good functioning downtown is the highest revenue generator per square foot of any part of a functional city. That's not the case with Olympia, and it hasn't been for a very long time. In fact, my mother passed away recently, and in cleaning out her house, I found an old newspaper article talking, it was July 6, 1975. It was the grand opening of the gazebo in Sylvester Park, and dozens of business folk had donated services and expertise and labor to build that gazebo, and people were coming to celebrate and have concerts at the gazebo in Sylvester Park. Fast forward to today, and most of our citizens feel comfortable going downtown, but it may not be the first thing that we do. I think we've let our not just our downtown businesses, but our senior citizens, our children and women not feeling safe downtown. So the first thing I would do to help businesses downtown is to restore that sense of public safety that the city's own polling said has been lost.
Thank you. Dante.
Yes, I actually really appreciate this question because contrary to popular belief, downtown has actually been thriving, and there have actually been more businesses that have opened in downtown over the course of the pandemic than those businesses that have closed. The City Council has approved a vacancy registry. I believe that that's something that will eventually help us to address the vacancies that we currently see in our downtown. As well as I support a downtown improvement district. I think we need one. That will help provide services to businesses in addition to having beautification services to clean up our downtown as well. I do believe the aesthetic is very important to attracting not just residents but potential business owners who want to open their businesses in our downtown. And I believe the Downtown Improvement District will help us achieve that goal.
Thank you. Back to you, David. You're first up for, please share your views about the recent attempt to create the Regional Fire Authority and what should happen now.
In looking at City Council, I heard a City Council member a while back say we fly at the 30,000 foot level and we don't get down into the nitty gritty of city policies. I beg to differ, but in regards to combining services and cost savings and better quality of life or better life for firefighters, I deferred to associates of mine who decided that we would be better off keeping things the way they were, and I think the voters concurred with that. when it comes to looking for cost savings or combining services or even intergovernmental compacts, I think we have to balance out, are we making cost savings financially, but are we also making improvements in terms of public safety, services, and quality of life for our citizens? And I think that I support the way that we've fallen on that with the voters.
Dante.
Could you repeat the question, please?
What's your view about the recent attempt to create the Regional Fire Authority, and what should happen now?
Yes, thank you. So my view, I did support it to go to a ballot before the public because I think that it's important and it's the responsibility of the City Council to inform the community of some of our service gaps that we have. And I believe that the RFA did just that, to educate the public and bring them up to speed on what it is that we were seeing. And so now that that was unsuccessful, we are back to the drawing board. And the first thing I believe needs to happen is that we need to appoint a permanent fire chief. Followed by that, we need to have the department do a strategic plan. And I believe we also need to have a staffing study at some point of the fire department. So in addition to that, we'll have the basic life support and OFD CARES programs, which I believe will also help fill some of those service gaps that we're currently seeing in our department.
Thank you. Desiree.
So I personally feel like there's a sweet spot with everything. There is a certain amount of responsibility that each individual location needs to have when it comes to caring for the people around them with the fire departments, but there are also things that it would not only be more cost effective, it would create more consistency, it would create more accountability, and it would also just ensure not just the enrichment of your specific community, but even the backyards that are not close to yours. And the reality is that Olympia is a wide region. It's not just the 4, 5, 10 blocks where people may live. It's not just downtown or the west side. So I think a certain level of consistency between everyone in certain departments would be very effective.
Thank you. Dante, your first step for this question. What are your views on the added restrictions on parking in the downtown area?
Yes, so my views were somewhat mixed on this issue. So I do believe that in high density areas in our community, it makes sense to have a zero parking minimum. That doesn't necessarily mean that there will be zero parking, however, but we do need to do this in order to incentivize the use of public transit, decrease our emissions due to transportation using it. And I do believe that we need to have an approach that is mixed. And so there are other areas in the community where it does not make sense to have a zero minimum parking standard. And so I feel that we need to make a gradual change on this and also assess the community's input as we do that, which is why I ultimately did support a mixed or a balanced approach to this. So we have certain areas where there are zero parking minimums and others where there are some minimum standard required for the city.
Desiree?
That is a great question. I actually went to the city town hall when they were talking about parking and different people were expressing their concerns. One thing that I did hear that did kind of hurt my heart was a lot of people felt like it was a need to be lazy and to have some luxury to be able to have parking. And the reality is, honestly, the roads, the streets, the sidewalks are not well enough for someone with a wheelchair, someone with a walker, someone with small children and groceries to walk through the streets at night. So I think all of those things do need to be taken into consideration. I think that maybe one of the builders associate representatives said it's between $5,000 to $35,000 per space when they have to build parking. Maybe there's a way, if they're not going to have parking, that could be put back into the community to ensure people can successfully live in an environment where they don't have a space to park.
David?
I think the balance that we have to strike is anything that we can do to support a smaller carbon footprint, bikeable, walkable, urban living, building up, not out. on the other hand, we have a downtown specifically where there are areas where people, if I go knock on doors, say they don't feel safe. And the last thing that they want to do is walk through certain parts of our town. That's sad to say, that's sad to think about. It's sad when our food bank director comes out and says, I have clients who won't come and get stuff at the food bank. Women, children, seniors not feeling safe walking through parts of town. So while we espouse this, because of public safety, we espouse this commitment to low carbon living and a small carbon footprint, if we don't provide the public safety that makes everyone feel welcome and safe in those places, we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Thank you. Desiree, you're up first for the next question. What would you propose to address homelessness?
This is a great question. I did not want to admit this, but very recently I was houseless. I was living in my car with my child. Unfortunately, like I said, the cracks are huge. They are gaping sinkholes, and there's not a lot of resources out there for people. When I was in the shelter, I lived in the shelter for about 4 months, and I was able to get out. One of the biggest roadblocks I think that prevent people from being able to overcome other challenges is that they don't have certain foundations. They've never had the luxury of being able to overcome other things from even their childhood that have snowballed throughout the rest of their life. And it's really hard to tell someone, just go out and be normal when they have all these other challenges that they're facing, especially when you've fallen so hard that you can't even afford a toothbrush. So I think overall encompassing support would be the best thing to do.
Thank you. David?
Well, I spent 5 years as Thurston County's homeless outreach case manager, doing direct outreach, direct service to homeless, mentally ill, and chemically addicted people in Thurston and Mason County. And things have changed drastically since the time that I spent those 5 years doing that. But I will say that whether it was liaison with the courts before we had a mental health court, writing grants for federal assistance for down payments or security deposits for getting apartments, one thing that has changed about some of the laws and about some of our policies and the way our funding works is we don't have enough incentive to help people help themselves. We don't have enough carrot and stick approach, if you want to call it, tough love, if you want to call it. It's obvious to everybody's door that I knock on. I will say that to a person, that what we've been doing for the last 10 years has been an utter failure and is destroying the quality of life of our community, and we need to do something different that includes incentive and enforcement.
Thank you. Dante?
Thank you, Karen, for this question. I actually believe that the City of Olympia is on the right track with addressing this issue. When you look at the fact that just as of 2018, the city did not have an internal dedicated staff to deal with housing and homelessness issues, and now we do. And we've done an incredible amount of development in that time, and also have housed a number of people since that time. So it does take time for a municipal government to address these issues, especially when they're so systemic and they go beyond our borders. I believe that addressing some of the issues around the multifamily tax exemption, which we're currently doing to incentivize developers to build more affordable housing, is necessary, as well as forming those interlocal agreements with the state to partner with us as well to help us with grant opportunities to address some of the encampments that we're seeing in our community as well.
Thank you. David, you're up first for the next question. How will you respond to calls from the community to investigate OPD-involved shootings and or deaths?
How would I respond as mayor to calls to investigate? We're in the process of trying to create a system. Well, I think 3 layers of a system has been in process trying to be developed. I think one of the things that we need to do to investigate calls on police behavior is to have that be done by an outside investigation, which it is by a team that is not, that's not good enough for some folks. We need to have citizen input on what is acceptable in terms of police standards and policies and procedures. We need to have a way to have our citizens' voices feel heard, but we also need, I think, our leaders, meaning our city council and our mayor, to, at the end of the day, support our public employees if they have been found to be well-behaved and following policies and procedures. We wouldn't do some of the things we've done to our local police to our code enforcement or our building inspectors, but we seem to have made police the scapegoat for a lot of issues.
Dante.
So first I want to start by saying that I believe the mayor's role when it comes to officer-involved shootings in our city really is to just take a beat and pause, despite what the community is pressuring elected officials to do. I actually find it to be troublesome when elected officials either prematurely speak or meddle in the business of investigations. And so I'll just lead with that. The other thing I think is important is to ask the police chief to meet with family members if possible, and also to encourage the police auditor to do a thorough review of the findings from the incident. And so I believe that's the mayor's role. And then once the investigation or hypothetical investigation concludes, then I think that it's the mayor's responsibility to communicate to the community what the findings are, and then at that point it may or may not be appropriate to share your perspective on that.
Desiree.
I personally think our elected officials are supposed to be our advocates. They're supposed to be our voices. They are supposed to represent us and what is in our best interest. Our elected officials are not supposed to be stone-faced. They are not supposed to not care. They are not supposed to not cry. They are not supposed to not be affected when someone is shot, when someone is hurt, when someone files a complaint. And while I do not think elected officials should be bullying people in order to make decisions in a way that they want, I absolutely think that they need to use the power that they do have to make sure everyone is heard. Even if only one person thinks that something foul happened, it should still be investigated because if something did happen, that will snowball to the rest of the community. Whether it takes 1 day, 5 years, 20 years, something can go out of control very quickly.
Thank you. Dante, you're up first. Explain how you would implement the new state law requiring more density in cities, the so-called missing middle.
Sure. So we're actually still in the midst of checking out all of the nuances of this new legislation and how it will impact us. But I will say is that Olympia has already been a leader on this effort prior to the state's legislation. And so we will continue to do what we've been doing, which is allowing for different types of housing units within our city's limits, and also encouraging our neighbors to join us in that, which also they'll now be required. I do believe that we can maybe perhaps look at some of our zoning restrictions and our streamlining our permitting processes and seeing how those things factor in and how they connect to the new legislation that has passed. So that way we can make sure that we're in compliance, but also Olympia likes to go above and beyond sometimes when we can. And I think on this issue, particularly with providing mixed use or different types of housing in our community, it's necessary that we do that.
Thank you. Desiree.
So, may I hear the question again?
Please explain how you would implement the new state law requiring more density in cities, the so-called missing middle.
That is a great question. Honestly, I feel like that, for me, would be a lot of trial and error. I do not have a great amount of experience when it comes to implementing laws on a larger scale. But what I do know is I have great follow-through, I have great communication, and I am very meticulous. I very much follow the rules, but I also know just because a rule is there does not mean that it's set in stone. Rules and guidelines and all those things are meant to enrich our lives. But if something is in there that is not enriching people's lives, then it should be challenged. So ultimately, what I would do is just make sure if there are things that should be challenged, they will be. If there are things that are not understood, that are not well defined, if there are things that are not working the way we thought, that it will continue to change and evolve like we would hope.
Thank you. David?
Well, I'm not sure where the city is in, as Dante said, in preparation for this to take effect, which is, I think, next month, July 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. I do know that the law, as it stands, isn't quite the terrifying thing that a lot of folks thought that it would be in terms of maybe we don't have a choice, but maybe cities shouldn't give up their ability to control their own zoning. That hasn't quite happened with the state law. There are some options within that law where there's a 25 versus 75% where this applies. And I think what the city can do in regards to people's concerns over neighborhood character being changed or quality of life or historic neighborhoods, there are some ways that we can preserve neighborhood character, preserve kind of the historical exclusions so that we don't have kind of a mismatched hodgepodge of neighborhoods or a dramatic, huge impact on parking and quality of life for people that see the composition of their neighborhoods changing.
Thank you. Back to you, Desiree, for your first with this one. With drug possession now a misdemeanor, would you support a city-sponsored drug court run through the municipal court?
So, that I would to a degree. If something were to be put in place, I do not want it to be another huge barrier. With drug court and things of those nature, I think proper supports should be put in place for people. I think there also needs to be an amount of understanding. I think people should be able to come forward and say they have made a mistake and they want to fix their mistakes, and they should be allowed the opportunity to fix them. I do not think taking these systems and telling someone, here's something that's accessible to you, but the challenge is too much for one person to carry, especially someone who realistically, if they've already fallen in drug court, probably doesn't have the best support system to take on these challenges. So I think if we can provide people the proper supports to be successful, then absolutely. But if we're going to leave them out to dry, then no.
David?
Years ago, before Thurston County had a drug court, I would get called down by Olympia Municipal Court to meet with someone, and I think it was Judge Jordan at the time, and it was very rudimentary. It was, you will work with Mr. Ross and his association or his agency and do these conditions of release, and if you don't, there will be consequences. And that was rudimentary at best. It didn't have all the great supports that some of the more comprehensive drug and mental health courts and so forth have today, but it worked because it had a balance. And I would absolutely support a community municipal drug court with that same balance. If we provided enough services, if we had enough access to treatment beds without a 6-month wait and things like that. But we'd also have to make sure that we accounted for when folks don't literally want to comply, when folks are habitually reoffending and there are no consequences to help them hit rock bottom and make choices in a different direction.
Dante?
So I believe that Olympia Police Department needs some type of intervention technique. And I think, given the new law that has passed, I believe that this is an opportunity for our department to be able to refer people to a drug court. So I would absolutely support that. We need some type of intervention. We cannot just sort of have a hands-off approach when it comes to drug use in our community. And we know that over-incarceration does not work as well. And we know that this is a sickness, frankly, drug addiction. And so I believe that this approach is a humane approach to understanding the situation and not criminalizing those who really do need the help. And so I would support the city's actions to initiate something like that, which I believe is also part of our reimagining public safety work strategies as well.
Thank you. So David, you're up first for the next question. Which boards, commissions, committees, et cetera, do you want to serve on as mayor and why?
I would like to serve on, we have kind of a little bit of public safety split between two boards with the city. I would like to serve on either of those because over the past few years with such a divisive, I think, national political scene and you know, tragic events of the death of George Floyd, local events with some incidents with police here in Olympia, we have a portion of our population that doesn't feel safe and thinks we need a whole lot more police, and a portion of our population who doesn't feel safe from police. And that needs to change. We need a bridge built, and we need voices heard, and we need reconciliation so that we can function again as a collaborative community rather than sort of a microcosm, a divided version, a local version of our divided national community. So I'd really love to serve on either of those.
Dante.
Yes, so I would like to eventually serve on the council's committees of Land Use and Environment Committee as well as Finance Committee. I think it would be important to at least spend some time on those committees internally. And then externally, I would like to eventually sit on the Lodging Tax Advisory Council as well as the Law and Justice Council. I believe that the lodging tax is very important, that there is an equitable approach in the work that the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee does. And so I believe I would be able to bring that perspective and that lens to it, as well as that I believe it complements our work in terms of boosting our economy and advancing our tourism. And so I think that would be a very important assignment for the mayor to be seated on.
Desiree.
Thank you. Honestly, I will say this. I used to be an initial loss reporting representative at an insurance company, which is essentially where they take your claims. And I used to ask a bunch of questions that felt irrelevant. And then I was promoted to a claims adjuster, and I found out why I asked all those questions. With that being said, I feel like I would want to dip my hand in every pot that's available to me. Maybe not super extensively, but I feel like when you at least have a basic understanding of how something works externally and internally, it can really help when you are trying to resolve other issues, because sometimes things you don't think about being connected actually are. And the way that they're intertwined together is kind of like building concrete. So, yeah.
Thank you. Dante, can we have a downtown where women and children and older people feel safe and welcome?
Yes, we can, Karen. And I believe we're on the right track to do that, which is also why I support what I mentioned earlier, a downtown improvement district. I do believe that so much of the experience of downtown has to do with the aesthetic. That includes property, crime, vandalism, graffiti. The aesthetic of downtown and frankly the city contributes to how people feel and whether or not they feel safe in our community. And I think addressing those issues will ultimately, you'll start to see a shift in people's perspective and their attitude and the way they carry themselves throughout our community. I also think that we really need a robust response to substance abuse and mental health. Similar to like housing was just left with the county, I believe that the city needs to start taking up some sort of more aggressive approach in those areas so that you'll see a major change in the downtown.
Desiree.
I would just like to say, personally, I think downtown is not as dangerous as people think it is. I'm not saying there are not risks out there. I'm not saying there are not situations where you should be more aware. Like I mentioned, I slept in my car with my child for quite some time. There were times, for example, there's no bathrooms available at night, but there was the Portland Loo, and there would be people in there, and they'd be in there for quite some time. I would have to use the bathroom, my daughter would have to use the bathroom, and we would just wait. Yes, if we would have went over and banged on the door and we were like, hey, we need to use the bathroom, there could have been an escalation. But, and I'm not saying that you should have to lessen who you are or you should have to suffer for other people, but there was also the understanding on my end that those people were going through something and they also have nowhere else to go besides that bathroom. So I think downtown is a lot safer than people think it is, and if they didn't see their neighbors, even their houseless neighbors, as their enemies, they wouldn't feel so insecure.
Thank you. David?
I think downtown definitely can be a safe, welcoming heart of, and I won't say our city, because in truth, the downtown is the downtown for Thurston County. No offense to my friends from Tumwater and Lacey, but when people say downtown, they're talking about the historic downtown of downtown Olympia. We're talking about where we have a study that's been sitting for 8 years about the greening of Capitol Way and making the entrance to our capital city a welcoming and environmentally conscious design that leads from our state capitol campus really down to Farmers Market. Today, if you walk out to the corner of 5th and Capitol, you can look in almost all 4 nautical directions and see vacancies. The way that we change that, we could put all of that on blaming homeless people or blaming addiction or blaming mental illness. But I think that's a little bit of a superficial scapegoating. And the way that we do that in the bigger picture is to plan for making our downtown the heart and soul of our community once again, taking pride in it, taking pride in it.
Thank you. Desiree, you're up first. Please talk about how the city has fallen short with encampment support and what you would do differently.
Oh, this is a great question. Things that I would do differently. Number one, I will say, as much as people love to talk about mental health, there's not a lot of funding actually going into mental health. The systems are already overloaded. The people who work there are already working the positions that they're working because they genuinely care, because they do love others, because they do understand that when you have so many gaps in your life, it is hard to have a full cup. I think the best thing that the city can do, honestly, is to house people in camps. I believe it was in Utah where they first started housing houseless people, and when they housed them, they saved $15,000 per person to provide them just a house and all the other costs that there is to having people living on the streets. So I think that would be the first step, is getting people into permanent structures, and then we can focus from there on integrating them into the community.
Thank you. David?
Encampments are a difficult and controversial topic in our community. I think one of the challenges we see is there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We cannot just sweep all the camps and put people in shelters. We also cannot sit and wait for permanent supportive housing for everyone who is on the streets in Olympia. We'll never be able to get to that, and we actually don't need that. We need a mixed use, just like we need a mixed use for everyone else. It applies to people who are living on the street. The difference, I think, that where we've fallen short is we've allowed a community to grow to where it's causing problems, and I don't mean the homeless community, I mean a specific encampments where it causes problems where maybe youth at risk who might otherwise end up in Job Corps or getting their GED or joining the military or doing something else, getting pulled into things or becoming a target for drug dealers or prostitution. So these encampments kind of come with baggage that is not only good, it's not good for the residents, and it's not good for the inhabitants of the encampments themselves.
Dante?
This is a great question. Thank you. I believe that the city's One Community Plan specifically states that we are to go around and make sure that we are hotspot checking, so to speak. So what should we be doing differently? We need to make sure that we, when we do break up an encampment, because we have provided additional housing and shelter for the folks that are in those encampments, we need to also make sure that there are no new encampments that are coming back up. So this is something that we are putting a greater emphasis on, and what I would like to place a greater emphasis on as mayor, is making sure that we do not have, that we're not breaking up encampments and scattering people throughout the city. I believe our approach with forming interlocal agreements with the state for those who are on state's rights of way and local rights of way is an approach that's working for us, and we'll continue to do that aggressively.
Thank you. David, you're up first for this one. How will you work with law enforcement to enforce the state's new drug law?
The most successful model that I have seen is municipalities and counties that have arranged basically a version of the embedded social worker model, where social workers, like what I used to do, outreach workers, police, work together to deal with people struggling with addiction, not throwing them in jail and throwing away the key, not giving them just a referral to treatment and then setting them scot-free, but basically a progressive stepping stone process that gives people chances to move forward, chances to fail and still succeed, but has clear and specific expectations. So we don't criminalize homelessness, we don't put people in jail for being homeless or for being addicted, but we certainly don't continue on the path that we've been on for the last 10 years that has created utter chaos in our community that is almost insurmountable if we don't change directions now.
Dante.
Could you repeat the question again, Karen?
How will you work with law enforcement to enforce the new, the state's new drug laws?
Sure, thank you. So I think it starts with conversations, as I said before, with our police chief, and having an understanding that they now have a tool at their disposal, or so to speak, they can intervene. And so I believe that it's encouraging them to take a humane approach in offering people different resources, having them go to a drug court, for example, if they need help. If they are repeat offenders, then we get to a point where we start talking about, well, what other intervention strategies do we have? Is it time for them to perhaps spend time incarcerated, or some other approach for those who seem to disregard the need for treatment, or for those who simply just have no regard for the law? And so I believe that taking that approach is what I would recommend to our police chief, and I would ask him to make sure that he adheres to the city's values while he implements this new law.
Thank you. Desiree.
Can you repeat the question for me? I'm sorry.
How will you work with law enforcement to enforce the state's new drug laws?
So first, I believe there should be some type of forum where the police can talk about the difficulties they have faced previously, and the areas of concern within any new laws and any challenges they may have with those new laws. Outside of just the police being able to provide feedback, I believe there's a Social Justice and Equity Commission. They can also just double check and make sure that things are being done to actually support people, even when we're told that we're doing them. If we're not, someone who can actually expose the truth and make sure that the people of our community are not just treated like free labor. I personally think if we're going to think about punishing people for not wanting to integrate into society, that it should be more about giving them the proper tools to integrate versus making them angrier and making them feel more outcast.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our questions for each of the candidates. Now I'll give you each an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement. Dante, we'll start with you.
Yes, so I'm running for mayor because I believe that we're in a time where our city needs stable leadership. I have great working relationships with each member of the council. We'll need to continue being effective as a body, and the mayor is a facilitator of that work. The work that involves boosting our local economy, advancing tourism, addressing the need for more affordable housing in our community, more permanent supportive housing, the lack of mental health care services and other services, social services. I believe that improving the quality of life for our residents is extremely important. We're at a time where I don't know if our community is feeling it, although our city is thriving. And so as mayor, I want to work on improving the quality of life for our residents, embracing our growing diversity in our community, and making sure that we continue to lead the way as the capital city.
Thank you. Desiree.
I want to say I respect Dante so much. I believe that he has accomplished a lot, and I believe as someone who also faces many barriers with people having opinions of you before they know you, what you have accomplished is so admirable. But I do not believe that stability is what is going to get Olympia further. And I'm not saying that as against you. I'm just saying for me, I believe some things do need to be shaken up. I think things need to be changed. I think that alternative routes need to be created. And ultimately, my goal with running is not just to make a political statement. I know when I've spoken to some people one-on-one, they feel that way. I genuinely have an interest in bettering all of Olympia, and I would hope that people could let me know their desires for Oli as well, so we can have a community everyone can enjoy.
Thank you. David.
4 years ago, I asked Olympia to consider voting in a different direction, and I was humbled at the outpouring of support. I was also humbled at the outpouring of support that was just a little bit more than that different direction that I suggested. 4 years later, I can only surmise that the things that I had concerns about, the things that I had expertise in and experience with, have only gotten worse. To that end, I'm asking Olympia again to consider, do you feel like the city is better off than it was 4 years ago? And if not, I would ask you to consider to vote in a different direction. If you'd like a team that stays consistent and stays the course, then I may not be the candidate for you. However, I am a team player, I am a team builder, but I also have the courage and the spine to stand up and say, hey, the emperor has no clothes. And right now, some parts of Olympia, the emperor has no clothes.
Thank you, David. Dante Payne, David Ross, Desiree Chantel Tolliver, thank you all three for participating in this forum. The League sincerely thanks Thurston Community Media for all of the work they have done to help make this forum happen. For years, the League and TC Media have worked together to educate voters in Thurston County, and we couldn't do this work without you. The League of Women Voters is proud to be a nonpartisan organization, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but always working instead on vital issues of concern to members of the public and to defend our democracy and empower voters. Despite our name, we're open to everyone. For membership, please check our website for how to become a member. And of course, we encourage viewers to be a voter. In the primary election, you'll get your ballots in the mail about mid-July, and you have until August 1st to cast your vote. Thank you very much for attending this forum. Thank you.